Chapter 9. Ireful Shell. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Equipment. Auxiliary. Consumable. Skills. Vondu. Ragna went over each word in his vision before throwing an inquisitive look at Caliph. She snickered and began. Firstly, you have 3 different types of items you can buy. Equipment refers to weapons and armor. Auxiliary items are what we call magical objects. For instance, magic pendants, rings, etc. More often than never, they have special effects that can either boost your stats or even give you a new skill. Attribute boosts are a lot rarer than stat boosts, by the way. Any item or skill that can increase the root attributes is very sought after. Ragna immediately thought of his shapeshift trait, but he of course didn't mention it, and Caliph continued her explanation. As for consumables, they're what you would expect. Food, potions, pills, scrolls, you get the idea. Now, following with the second line on the window you're seeing right now, there's skills and Vondu. The former is self-explanatory. You can buy skills from the shop, but I warn you, they're very expensive most of the time. Well, except Nirvana skills, of course. There's none there. Ragna reacted to that. What are Nirvana skills? He had seen the 9-tailed wolf's tailed pearl, and he himself had one. But he wasn't aware of what it was actually. Well, it's normal you don't know. Nirvana skills are called as such because they're transcendent in nature and, if I can say so, completely broken. They are exceptionally rare, but not to the point where you would only see one every 100 years or something. I'd say that 1 out of 10,000 hosts have one. But it can vary honestly. Sometimes we get 10 in one single batch. Ragna scowled and tilted his head. Other than the fact that he had just learned that he had a very special ability, he wasn't perturbed at all. But there was something that bothered him a little. It could have been his imagination, but he couldn't be sure. Why would I not know about it? I could have asked my AI. Well, silly, the section for them doesn't appear on your status if you don't have one yourself. How could you have gotten the idea to ask your AI? She replied, and he nodded absent-mindedly. Once again, entirely unbothered by the fact that she had made another assumption about him. At this point, he had a feeling that if the vixen in front were to learn what he had, half-willing, hidden from her, she might get very angry. Fortunately for him, she just gazed at him with eyes entirely blinded by the fact that he was new. This woman is amazingly clueless, he commented inwardly, and Pronos apparently understood his recent friend's thoughts and nodded in agreement. Anyway, she raised her voice, unaware of the disrespectful thoughts of her guests. To finish, you have the Vondu. It's what I told you earlier. It's the public auction for the hosts to use at will. I see, Ragna muttered and tapped on the equipment button. A long list of items was displayed in front of him with a basic description for each, such as the name, the rarity, and the type. If you want to filter or search for something in particular, as I said, ask your AI. Now, on to recommendations. How much do you have at the moment? 10,000 tallies, Ragna replied mechanically as he scrolled down the list and read each line with almost inhuman speed. Then, he noticed that Caliph had gone silent. He glanced at her and immediately realized he might have made a mistake going by her dumbfounded expression. Caliph had almost choked on her tea, again, when she had heard his current wealth. How do you have so much? She shouted in shock. What? Is it a lot? Of course, it's a lot. When I went through the initiation like you, I didn't even get 1/10 of what you got. And I was one of the best from my batch as well. What did you do to get a 5-figure reward out of the bat? Beats me, he lied with an unperturbable fa. Ade. Maybe it's because I wandered into the forest after completing the mission and hunted more kobolds. It's in there that I lost my arm. I lost it to a second wolf that was in there, he said a half-truth and observed the vixen's expression as he did so. A second wolf. Odd, she frowned. You're not the first to wander outside of the mission zone, but there's usually nothing but low-level kobolds. I never heard about another wolf other than the rider kobolds. I knew it, Rachna uttered internally, his suspicions were confirmed. She doesn't know of the nine-tailed wolf. Was it a mistake from the system that I crossed it? You either have very bad luck or the opposite considering that allowed you to get 10,000 talis, she added offhandedly. Luck, huh? He mused. His luck attribute was at 9 and he had already tried and couldn't increase it with free points. For all I know, 9 might be a pretty high number, he thought. Whatever, Caliph sighed. You're already weird enough. Nothing should surprise me at this point. You have no idea, Foxy. With 10,000, you've got a huge leeway. First things first, recovery potions, healing potions, and mana potions should be something to look into. There are different tiers and each one of them is more expensive than the previous but also more effective obviously. You can balance the cost-efficiency on your own. Rachna returned to the menu of the shop and selected consumables this time. Alexa, show me the second lowest tiered for each of those 3 categories, he ordered internally. Understood, she spoke for the first time after his wakening. The AI returned a result in record time and 3 different prompts were presented to him. Designation. Consumable/recovery potion tier. 9, lowest. 10, restores physical stamina and light mental stress upon consumption. Becomes ineffective after level 40. Price. 100 talis. Designation. Consumable/healing potion tier. 9 heals physical wounds and minor illnesses. Becomes ineffective after level 40. Price. 100 talis. Designation. Consumable/mana potion tier. 9 restores 50 MP. Becomes ineffective after level 40. Price. 100 talis. Rachna absorbed the information and Caliph resumed, of course, other than potions, a weapon and an armor of some sort are necessary. Then, although they are expensive, you can buy some basic skills, especially with your budget. Finally, you have your magic to awaken but that's not for me to do. It will happen on the first plateau. Any questions? None, Rachna replied calmly while inputting the number of potions he wanted inside some sort of cart. The fact that it was like any shopping site you could find on the net amused him a bit. In the end, he chose to buy 3 of each of those potions, decreasing his wealth to 900 talis. He glanced at a few other consumables that looked interesting but decided to pass for now. After that, he had no need for a main weapon since he had Sonata but he thought that having a knife was quite useful. Blood Fawn wasn't with him anymore and his Swiss knife had been too damaged already by its use against the kobolds. So, he bought a nameless one with 10 of attack but no perks. It'll have to do, he thought then considered the other recommendation, armor. His uncle had told him about this once in the past. It was when the old man had returned home with a bullet in his waist and asked him to extract it. Then, he had asked why he wouldn't wear a plated vest. Vests. I don't use those. Well, my coat is made of the same stuff as your scarf, and it's plenty capable of protecting me from blades and small .caliber bullets. But, other than that. No. Armor makes you slower. Makes you heavier. What happens when you're slower? You get sluggish. What happens when you're sluggish? You get less attentive. What happens when you lose attention? You get closer to death. And worst of all, if you don't feel the ache, you cannot live. When you use something that warps the core value of a soldier putting his body and life on the front, you lose the edge that we all need. Go naked for all I care. Feel the wind around you, the blades in your flesh, the blood on your skin, and the bullet burns. And do whatever you can so that those scars never get bigger. The more time you spend like that, the more your body will learn. Learn what, you ask? To not get hurt. Ragnar snorted inwardly as he remembered the old man's words. His uncle had always been very cryptic, and sometimes you could learn a lot from his words. But, to him, that particular speech was slightly egotistical. Most people would die on the battlefield without defense, and his uncle was just one of the rare individuals with enough skill to be considered a one-man army. You could not compare. But, he has a point. An armor is a liability. It doesn't listen to you like a weapon does, and you have no way to assure it does its job. It can't protect everything as well, Ragnar thought, and closed the equipment tab after merely adding new clothes to the cart, since the ones he had at the moment were blood-stained and damaged, especially his left sleeve. After that, he spent around 10 minutes looking through the auxiliary items and skills. The former had very interesting aspects, while the latter were all useful but expensive. He needed something to fill his lack of defense, and he had to manage something with his remaining money. Although his newly acquired trait allowed him to get more tanky, he couldn't activate it at will. In that mindset, he chose a certain skill that cost him 7,500 thalis. The skill was called Ireful Shell. It basically increased his defense proportionately to the damage he took. It was a very good skill on paper, but there was a reason why 7,500 was enough to buy it, otherwise, this skill would have been too strong. Designation: Cursed Skill / Cognitive Skill Name. Ireful Shell Blight Tier. For learning requirements. Level 530 ATR Cap Feral Race Description. A responsive defensive skill. When the host is injured, the AI will evaluate their state and choose between 5 different options. Lightly injured, mildly injured, heavily injured, critically injured, death's door. Respectively, the defense boosts given are 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, and 50%. The boost disappears after 20 minutes following the last injury suffered by the host. On the other hand, when this skill is learned, the host will gradually lose their rationality as their injuries aggravate until they become berserk. Note: this skill is cursed. It cannot be deleted or unlearned. The curse is also susceptible to an increase in intensity if conditions are met. There were a few interesting things about this skill. One of them being the fact that if he hadn't changed race, he would have been unable to learn it. Then, the pros were obvious but the cons were massive. For probably everyone except Ragnar, it would have been an inexcusable flaw. But for him, it was perfect. For one, he knew for a fact that he was unable to produce powerful raw emotions. It was due to a certain incident he had experienced younger. His uncle had told him that it had caused his brain to make a countermeasure. This measure was what the old man called obsidian blood. A split behavior that would resurface whenever his emotions reached a certain threshold. The cigarettes of obsidian smoke had precisely been made in order to suppress it and stabilize it. But Ragnar didn't want to suppress it now as much as before. The strength it gave him wasn't something he could ignore. In that way, he was hoping that Ireful Shell would trigger obsidian blood and not rob him of his sanity. It was a gamble but one worth taking. As he was thinking about that, Alexa spoke up in his mind, acknowledged. Unnamed trait has been updated to obsidian blood. He was a bit surprised but certainly satisfied that it wasn't listed as anymore. Hey, you're finished? Caliph asked with a sullen look. I already told you I'm working overtime here. I want to go home, you know. Ragnar sent her a deadpan look. Then why did you indulge yourself in explaining all of that? I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it's hard to believe you gave the same explanation to everyone. Now that I think about it, how many hosts did you have to welcome? Caliph pouted at his words. If you're grateful, then act like it. The only reason I humored you for so long was that you were slightly interesting. I usually just say hello, give them a printout with the things they have to know and answer their questions. And to answer yours, it's only 10. There are many temporary shopkeepers for the initiation. It's a sort of part-time job. Ragnar nodded. As you said, this really feels like a strange society. Based on what you said, it has even evolved until it could work along with the system itself, he muttered to himself. The vixen sighed deeply. And I will probably contract an aversion after today. Overly calm and smart people are a pain. I regret taking an interest in you. I see. So, you're into shy and impressionable kids only, huh? Her expression twisted and Rachna swore he thought he heard the sound of glass breaking before she shouted, "Fuck off, Wolfie. I'm not a predator." Chapter 10. Heading to zero. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You're an asshole. You know that. Caliph huffed and Rachna shrugged. Tell me something I don't know, he quipped. By the way, do you have a recommendation for an object that would help me hide this? He said while pointing at his tail and ears. She scowled. You want to hide them? Well, to blend in with humans, it would be necessary, but how did you do it until now? Damn, woman, couldn't you have remained clueless a bit longer? Rachna uttered silently, but his mouth was moving without hesitation since he had already thought of an excuse, quite easily actually. I could just control my ears so they would blend in with my hair or use a hat. As for the tail, usually, I would wrap it tightly around my waist. I see. Then, indeed, you truly need something. Considering how tumultuous your life is going to get, this won't be a viable way anymore. Really. I'm full of respect for this woman. She's helping me make my lies more believable with each word coming out of her mouth. Rachna once again made an unheard remark only known to Pronos, who didn't miss its sardonic tone. How much are you willing to spend for it? She asked. Right back at you. How much do you think is reasonable? Well, 1,000 should be plenty. I even have the perfect item in mind. It's called Ulvia's Veil. It's an auxiliary item. Rachna searched for the item in question right away and inspected its effect. Designation. Auxiliary item / necklace name. Ulvia's Veil rarity. Green +5 senses when worn. Gain the dependent skill, Ulvia's illusion, allowing the host to hide their appearance under a low-level illusion. The more modification is made to the host's original appearance by the illusion, the more easily it can be seen through. Cost. 10 MP / hour price. 1,000 tallies. Really? It needs mana to work. With my current mana pool, I barely have enough to sustain it for 4 hours, he uttered, and Caliph shrugged. What did you expect? Most skills come at the cost of MP. Some rare ones have nothing more than a cooldown, then there are others who need stamina among other things. You get the idea. It is what it is. Why do you care anyway? It's not like you have many skills that consume mana since you're new. Do you listen to what I say, Foxy? The problem is that I only can maintain it for 4 hours. What about your mana regeneration? She asked with a tilt of her head. Rachna was rendered speechless for the first time. His mind went through the calculation instantly, and the time he could sustain the skill was, well, as much as he wanted. His mana regeneration was already higher than the cost. He face-palmed and the air around him became gloomy. What's wrong? Is your regeneration factor a bit low? Don't be sad, you're not the only one with an unlucky number. You can use items to compensate. That's not it, he whispered, but Calitha's sensible ears still caught his words. What is it then? I'm disappointed in myself for having needed you to notice this detail, he replied wearisomely. What do you take me for, brat? She stood up and threw her empty cup at Rachna, who just tilted his head to the side to dodge it. A clueless vixen, he answered honestly without any change to his voice. Her expression twitched several times. She wondered if she could just kill the kid and be done with it. She exhaled and just dropped back on the couch. Just confirm the purchase of what's in your cart so that I can be freed from you. If he could express emotions, Rachna would have probably laughed. The only thing hinting at his amusement was how his eyes had briefly flashed, which Caliph noticed and only served to infuriate her more as a vein popped on her forehead. Alexa, add Ulvia's veil to the cart and cache it. Understood. A short minute after that, Rachna spotted movement from his right. He looked over the source and got slightly interested as he saw a small three-tailed fox with bright orange fur walking over while balancing 3 sealed boxes on the tip of its tails. It also had a bag which it carried in its mouth. Then, Rachna almost leaped away from his seat when he saw a wooden table appear out of nowhere between him and Caliph. The little fox jumped on it and put the perfectly cubic and identical boxes down, close enough to Caliph so that she could reach them, before placing the bag near Rachna's feet. The latter looked at it and saw that it was the clothes as well as the plain knife he had bought for 50 talis. Thank you, Sylphie, Caliph smiled and patted the fox who had sat down on her lap. She then proceeded to grab the first box. A blue glow was transferred from her hand to the sealed container which briskly opened. Inside the box lied 3 rows of thin glass tubes. Each row had a different color. There were red, blue, and green. Caliph pushed the box toward Rachna, who raised an eyebrow. The red ones are the healing potions. The green ones are for stamina and the blue ones are for mana. Rachna nodded silently and pulled out one of the tube-like potions out of the box. He looked through the red liquid inside as the 9-tailed woman opened the second box. This time, when she saw what was inside, she frowned. There was a card in the box. It was lying on red velvet fabric. The card was gray and its back depicted a spiked shield surrounded by 4 chains that found their origins in the corners of the object. Caliph picked the card up and looked at the other side, which was occupied by blood-red letters forming the name of the skill as well as a sort of incantation below it. Ireful shell, she muttered and glanced at Rachna, who had already stopped his inspection of the potions to look at her. This is a cursed skill, Wolfie. In other words, it's dangerous. They are potent indeed, and I've even heard of hosts above the 500th, veterans, who fell to the temptation of these cursed abilities. Let me tell you that it didn't end well for them. Are you sure about this? I do not follow examples, you make your own, he was interrupted by the fox woman. Yes, I heard the first time, she said and deftly threw the card at him. He caught it with 2 fingers and observed it. That's what you call a skill card. To learn what it contains, chant what's written under the name. Be careful, she added with a serious and almost worried tone. Rachna merely hummed in response and started reading the incantation, Crust of Embrace. Shield of Fury. Wall of Desperation. Forgo the pain of foundation and offer ire to victory. When he finished, the card turned into particles of light that entered his chest. Caliph sighed and opened the last box, which held a sky-blue necklace, then put it on his side of the table as well. Rachna took a minute to inspect everything before pulling out the clothes he had bought. They were nothing more than a red and black hoodie along with black jeans. He was about to take off his ripped shirt when he saw the vixen's eyes fixed on him. He scowled. She responded in kind and the two glared at each other until she grumbled and finally turned around. A short moment later, Rachna was finished dressing and his scarf's color gave a very pleasant contrast with the rest. Also, funnily enough, his clothes had also been given to him with a hole for his tail. He then proceeded to grab the knife sheathed in leather, but before he could put it at his belt, Caliph spoke up, "Wait." He looked at her and raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" She didn't reply and merely pulled out a small silver ring from her pocket. She threw it to him, who casually caught it in midair. The prompt that the system gave him after surprised him. Designation: Special Item/Spatial Ring Tier 5A ring with a separate dimension of its own, capable of storing all kinds of objects with the exception of living beings and pure energy. Note: a high-tier spatial tool with a very advanced manipulation of the objects coming in and out. Current capacity: 1,000 cubic meters. Rejoice, Wolfie. A T.5 spatial ring can hardly even be seen by anyone below the 400th plateau. Why are you giving this to me? He inquired. It's not like he was unhappy with the object, but it was dubious, to say the least. There's no need to look at me like that. That's junk for me and I happen to have it with me. You piqued my interest, I thought I might as well give you a small gift. I'm not giving you that big of an advantage anyway. Take it as a reward for entertaining me. Ragnar stared at the woman in front of him for a while before sliding the ring around the middle finger of his right hand. Immediately after, the second he willed it, the potions on the table, as well as the knife in his hand, were sucked in by the tiny jewel mounted on the ornament. Nifty, he commented, and Caliph snickered at his underwhelming reaction. She still considered him to be quite uncouth, but she couldn't deny that she had found a liking in his personality. Well, it is time to. She was about to send Ragnar away when Sylphie, who was on her lap, suddenly shot up and ran into the aisles of the store once again. Did you buy something else, Wolfie? She asked in confusion. No, but, he muttered while glancing at Pronos, who had been very focused on something until just now. The snake hissed softly to answer his master's untold question. I see, Ragnar uttered. Wait, did your pet buy something from the store? Caliph asked incredulously. Apparently. Do you even know what that means? She questioned with an irked tone that he didn't fail to notice. Only pets with S-rank potential or above can get money for themselves and use the system shop. They are considered to be even more important than C-rank hosts. She shouted. Oh. Don't owe me. Why didn't you tell me that little guy was one? You never asked. Ragnar retorted, and she buried her face in her palms. She suddenly wanted to take back everything positive she had thought about this brat. It didn't take long for Sylphie to come back with a box held by one of her tails. Caliph groaned and did her job as she unsealed it. The only thing inside was a transparent pill releasing chemical smoke. Before the vixen could say anything, Pronos jumped from Ragnar's shoulder and happily landed on the box before dragging the pill into his mouth with his tongue and swallowing it. The little snake then put on a gratified expression as he returned to his owner. Caliph watched him with a blank look until he was back on Ragnar's shoulder. I don't even want to explain to you what your snake just ate. Find out yourself later. Are you done this time? Will any of you buy something at the last second, or can I finally send you off? Ragnar and Pronos looked at each other and simultaneously shook their heads. Good, Caliph said and stood up. At the same time, Ragnar quickly put Ulvia's veil around his neck and a flood of intuitive information about his new skill entered his mind. He activated it and his tails and ears vanished under an illusion. He nodded satisfyingly at the result and stood up as well. When you're out of here, you will wake up in the same place as you were during the initiation. The only difference is that it will be the actual Plateau Zero this time, and you will be together with the people that were transported from the same place as you, Caliph explained, and a light shrouded Ragnar's body. He watched the light cover his body in its entirety, and right before his vision turned white, he saw the fox woman waving her hand at him. See you again, Wolfie. Those were the last words he heard from her before he disappeared from the shop. When he was gone, Caliph didn't know if she had to be relieved or disappointed. Relieved because of the brat's insolence and seemingly no regard for how powerful or beautiful she was, and disappointed because she hadn't had that much fun in a long time. She smiled at herself before snapping her fingers. An oriental door then appeared in front of her as if it was a mirage. She opened it and stepped through with Sylphie following her. In only a second from her perspective, she ended up in the middle of a very luxurious room. Sylphie went to the queen-sized bed and curled herself on it. Meanwhile, Caliph turned toward the door of the room, which opened to reveal a maid with fox features but only one tail. My lady, you're back. Did your time as a shopkeeper go well? She asked respectfully. You could say that, Caliph answered and sat down on her bed next to her fox pet. I met someone very interesting, in fact. At least, this whole thing wasn't as boring as I thought it would be. Oh. I wonder who could have possibly caught my lady's interest. Caliph grinned at her maid's curiosity. Maybe you'll meet him in the future. He looked like a promising youth. She chuckled and abruptly thought of something that widened her grin. Nyla, go and inform the board that I want to be assigned as the personal shopkeeper of a certain host until he reaches the 500th plateau himself. The maid was shocked by the order. My lady, are you sure? This mission was nothing more than the last prerequisite for you to enter the 900th plateau. You do not need to continue, much less for a measly seedling. This is an order, Nyla. I'm not asking for your opinion. Yes, my lady. I apologize for my impudence. The maid bowed nervously at the cold tone of her mistress. In that case, may I ask for the name of the concerned individual? Caliph smirked as she stroked the snoozing Sylphie. Rachna Ziora. Chapter 11. Scram. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The first thing Rachna saw after the light finally faded away was a flying figure that wrapped around him only to block his sight again. Kronos, who was in his scarf, was also suddenly pressed really tightly. Idiot! I was worried. A voice shouted. Flavia. Rachna immediately recognized the voice and struggled for a few seconds to get her off. But he was afraid to hurt her by mistake, so he rapidly gave up. Flavia. I'm overjoyed. Really? But can you get your breasts out of my face so I can breathe? At his words, she pulled back with a pout on her face and a mildly flushed expression. He took a deep breath, and so did the little snake. He passively noticed that she also had changed clothes like him. Overall, she still had the same style, but the quality of the clothing had become a lot more good looking, and her skirt was longer while being open on one side to allow more movement. She also had a pendant hanging from her neck. It's not my fault you're so late. The initiation ended yesterday, but you weren't there, Flavia said while gradually calming down, knowing he was safe. Rachna snorted internally. He had in fact known Flavia for nearly 5 years. She actually was his neighbor, and when his uncle went missing, she had been the one to help him get through and settle things with society. Well, as happy as I am to reunite, he thought, and looked around him. He was currently standing in the middle of the school's yard, and almost every surviving student and teacher seemed to be gathered in it, spread across the area. Some were staring at him in wonder for his late arrival, others were being condescending, thinking he had done poorly during the initiation, and the remaining ones were jealous because of him being hugged by the very popular teacher. But all that aside, there was something that confused Rachna. All of them were visibly waiting for something, or, to be exact, they seemed to be waiting for him. Aside from that, most of them were looking at something in the sky. As he was about to follow their line of sight, he heard a chilling voice. Everyone is here, finally. His eyes widened and he quickly looked up. He spotted a silhouette floating in midair. It took his eyes a few seconds to get used to the sunlight before he could discern what it was exactly. This time, in contrast with Caliph, he was utterly confounded by this being. The silhouette was a humanoid robot standing tall at 3 meters. It held a cane in its hand and wore a red and yellow attire that Rachna didn't fail to recognize as a clown outfit. From the comically big shoes to the butterfly knot and the red nose. It was a weird sight. Additionally, the robot's mouth was a screen that displayed a full-blown grin. The clown looked back at him, and the color of that very screen turned from white to purple. It whirled its cane and pointed it at him. What took you so long? Did you fall asleep while hiding from the kobolds? It asked with the obvious intention to taunt him. Some of the students even snickered. The clown robot expected an outburst, but what it got instead was a completely blank face, devoid of emotions, and a non-comical reply. You could say that. His words caught the attention and curiosity of a few individuals in the yard, but the clown's grin switched from a grin to a flat line. What an unfunny brat you are. I prefer when you humans get upset. Your faces when you see blood is hilarious, it exclaimed with a black-colored smirk before returning to a more pensive-looking expression. Well, I'd truly be disappointed if you actually were like them. I do have to say your kind is harder to intimidate, it added, which raised the eyebrows of many people. Rachna easily picked up on the hidden message in his words. This robot seemed to be someone in a similar situation to Caliph and had obviously seen through his illusion. It probably wanted him to panic for his amusement. However, Rachna stared back with an impassive face and the clown harumphed. Anyway, it is time. Instantly after, everyone received a prompt from their system. Tutorial mission. Escape description. This is the second and last trial offered to newcomers. Those who succeed will be able to enter the Seedling Plateau and officially become a tiered host. Objective. Wildlands are surrounding you. Explore them, survive, and overcome the danger to find the exit of the dimension. Note. You have as much time as you require. Additional information. The 3 first contestants to find the exit will be granted the title, Crowned Seedling. Default rewards. Access to the first plateau, 1,000 tallies. On this note, humans, survive well, the clown uttered and disappeared with a swirl of its cane. Afterward, everyone scattered in their own groups. Rachna looked around for a few seconds before turning toward Flavia. Well, mind filling me in? Looks like I'm the only one lost here. Who was that stupid-looking Pierrot? She smiled wryly and reminisced a little before speaking. Well, the only thing he said about himself yesterday was that his name is Gray and that he's the caretaker of our group from this batch. Our batch, huh? Yes, you also were filled in the shop about the system, right? She asked and Rachna nodded. From what he told us, every year a new batch of hosts with high potential is summoned by the system. Apparently, the current batch only concerns the Earth and we are divided into groups. I suppose our school isn't the only place that was taken away. I see, Rachna muttered, then felt a pair of eyes on him. He looked over his shoulder and met the stare of a black-haired girl. Her red irises surprised him a bit at first, but his focus then shifted to something else. I don't remember this girl being in our school. As he was getting suspicious, someone's arm abruptly wrapped around him. Hey, buddy. You're alive after all. I was worried for a second. Rachna groaned as he glanced at the newcomer next to him. It was a blonde teen with blue eyes and an athletic stature. He was a perfect fit for the description of the stereotypical popular kid. Alan, so, you survived, huh? Rachna muttered with no change in his tone. Why didn't you let yourself get eaten? It would have made my life easier. Now, I'm sure you're happy to see me, the teen replied without batting an eye. He too was one of the very few acquaintances Rachna had. Alan was a special character. He was orphaned at the age of 10 after a car accident, and that's around the two of them met. The blonde had been the most accurate description of depressed at the time, but his encounter with Rachna had somehow turned him into the most popular guy in his school years after a few months. The truth of what happened between the two of them was a secret of theirs that even Flavia didn't know. Well, jokes and you being at Sundra aside, Alan continued, and Rachna had to resist the urge to elbow him in the gut. Instead, he glanced at his old friend to see that he had a dreadfully serious expression on his face. I'm really glad you're alive, the blonde uttered with a grave expression, and Flavia took on a saddened look. Rachna noticed how the mood had changed from a happy reunion to something vastly darker. Alan's fists were also clenched and trembling. Who? He asked with a composed and very calm voice that made Alan smile wryly, finding relief in the fact that his friend was the same as always. Kelly, Hubbard, B., and Kyle, he listed grimly, and Rachna closed his eyes. He remembered the faces attached to those names. He never talked to them per se, but he often saw them hanging around Alan. He opened his eyes and turned toward Flavia. What about the rest of the school? How many? She lowered her head a bit. We haven't properly counted the missing students yet, but I'd say around half of them are missing. Alan sighed and took his arm off from Rachna's shoulders before looking at him. What are you going to do, Rach? Whatever you decide, I'll follow. Rachna scowled at him. Don't trust me too much, Alan completed while waving his hand. Yeah, I know. You've told me that many times already, but there wasn't a single time where it was a bad idea. Rachna grunted and Flavia giggled, noticing that the mood had brightened up a lot. I have to agree with him, she added. We both know what kind of trainer you had. There is probably no one more reliable than you in this school. I'd bet on that too, Alan laughed. Rachna sighed internally. For now, let's get away from here. Flavia tilted her head. What do you mean? He was about to answer her question when a voice interrupted him. Miss Gina, you're here. He turned toward the source with a raised eyebrow. Rachna saw a group of students led by a few professors walking in their direction. The one who had called Flavia was a slim-looking teacher with a wide smile. That guy, Rachna squinted. What was his name again? He thought, and Alan smiled wryly since he knew perfectly what he was thinking just from his expression. After several years, the blonde teen had learned to decipher his friend's thoughts just by looking at his eyes. Mr. Hartz. Flavia exclaimed in a semi-surprised voice. Were you looking for me? Yes, I was, the man nodded and stopped in front of the trio with his group following him. Rachna and Alan's attention immediately zeroed on the firearms they were carrying. They looked at each other and quietly stepped to the side while Flavia talked with Hartz. Well, is there something I can do for you? The former inquired. I wanted to invite you. Invite me? Yes, my group and I were going to explore the forest together. The more we are, the better our chances. What do you think? Would you join us? Of course, the two students over there can come as well, Hartz stated politely, but neither Rachna, Alan, or even Flavia missed the obvious ill intent hidden behind those words. Alan sneakily took a look at the others behind Hartz and frowned at the disgusting stares thrown at Flavia. Look at them. Do they really think that we can't notice? He whispered. Those with borrowed power tend to misunderstand its limits, Rachna replied in an equally hushed voice, and Alan glanced at him. You mean their guns? Rachna nodded and continued to observe the ongoing conversation between Flavia and Hartz. I'm quite fine, I prefer to stay with these two young men, the latter declared. In this situation, I believe the trust between the members of a group is more important than their number. Due to my being acquainted with the relatives of these two boys, they are probably the ones I trust the most here. Hart's eyes widened at the firmness in her tone. This conversation wasn't going his way. She had clearly decided to refuse his invitation no matter what he said. His eyes got a little darker and the armed individuals behind him raised their weapons a bit, making it barely noticeable. Alan clicked his tongue and was about to ask Rachna what to do when he saw that the usually cold and uninterested purple eyes were significantly more focused. If it wasn't Alan, very few people would have realized that the teen was glaring. Pronos, Rachna uttered to seemingly no one, but he was loud enough that everyone looked at him. He then walked toward Hartz and stood a head taller than him. The teacher stepped back a little with a cautious expression. You are Rachna Ziora, right? The infamous indolent top student, he said with a smile. We would be happy to welcome you as shut your mouth. Hartz immediately quieted down and his expression sunk. Unfortunately for you and me both, these two idiots have decided to follow me, Rachna spoke evenly and Flavia made a crooked smile while Alan sighed exaggeratedly. So, I'll be taking over from now on. My answer to your invitation is, scram, bastard. Chapter 12. S plus potential. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The moment Rachna finished speaking, everyone fell silent. The people who had stayed behind instead of leaving the school grounds were also shocked. It was known to all of them that since the day before, Hartz had been gathering people to join his group and several of them had bought firearms from the systems shop. "He's done for, who's that dude anyway?" one boy muttered whilst watching from one of the school building's windows. "Ragna Ziora," a voice answered him and the boy jumped in fright. "Boss, you know him." The one who had spoken was an 18-year-old looking guy with dirty blonde hair and green eyes. He wore red and black clothes and his T-shirt exposed a large part of his upper chest which had the tattoo of a 4-winged blazing bird on it. "Never spoke to the guy," he shrugged. "But we kind of know each other." How so?" "He and I are sleeping buddies." "The heck's a sleeping buddy?" The apparent subordinate sweat dropped. "Then, should we help him?" "Why?" he retorted with an honestly confused tone. "Why? Yes, of course," the lackey replied nervously. "He's just a stranger after all. There's nothing to gain by saving him." "Once again, what are you talking about?" "Anyway, let's join the rest." "We'll leave now," the boss said and turned around. "I wanted to deal with that teach personally but it seems like my job is cut out. Hart's a dumbass. He's taunting a beast too much for him to handle." The subordinate was left utterly lost as he followed his leader. What does the boss mean by that? He wondered. Meanwhile, from another place near the school's wall, the black-haired woman Ragna had spotted earlier was also watching the altercation happening in the middle of the yard. "You damn kid," Hartz fumed and before he could lash out at the brat who had insulted him, a student behind him suddenly pointed his rifle at Ragna. "I'm done with this, teach. Let's just kill that guy and take Miss Flavia," he declared and grinned. "It's not like we need their consent, right?" His grin was immediately shared by everyone else. Even Hartz now sported a smirk, completely foregoing his polite attitude. He raised his hand and at least 10 other rifles were pointed at Ragna. "Now, kid, be smart and hand over Miss Gina or I'll order to shoot." Ragna's expression became even more vacant if it was possible. In a certain way, it almost looked like he was ready to sleep. "Did you know?" He raised his voice. "The saliva of mosquitoes carries something alike to an anesthetic. That's why you don't feel anything when they sting you," he said something that perplexed everyone. Hartz frowned. What does that have anything to do with the situation? Well, can you imagine how deadly it would be if, let's say, a snake with camouflage abilities had that peculiar trait? Before the teacher could make head or tails of what he was saying, he heard several thuds behind him. His eyes widened to the maximum and he started sweating heavily. He didn't want to look back but he had to. From the corner of his eyes, he saw his lackeys lying on the ground with pulsing blue veins. "Wah, ha. Scary, isn't it?" Ragna commented. He had very quickly checked Prono's status earlier and he found out the effect of the pill the little guy had bought. Anesthetic secretion. Limited to creatures capable of injecting substances through an appendage. They become capable of producing anesthetic. The higher the level, the stronger the effect and the bigger the quantity. A creature with an already existent ability to make poison will be able to mix the two. The efficiency depends on the type of poison. Ragna started walking toward Hartz and the latter tensed and urgently pulled out a handgun from his back. He was about to aim it when it was suddenly snatched away. He was then kicked so hard that he blacked out for a second. He fell on his knees and saw the legs of someone standing in front of him. "I hate guns," Ragna said calmly and pulled the slide of the handgun, ejecting the bullet inside the chamber. "Do you know why?" Hartz looked up slowly and shivered when he saw the purple eyes staring at him with chilling indifference. They give an illusion of power to fools. Another bullet was ejected with a cling. They kill too easily, both out of malice and goodness. Another. They embody the biggest flaw of humans. Another. Yet they still take pride in them. Another. Worst of all, they allow trash like you to hurt others. Rachna pulled the slide one last time and pointed it at the teacher's forehead. And finally, they're annoyingly loud, he added impassively and pressed the trigger, but what followed was just the mechanical sound of the hammer and nothing more. Still, Hearts fainted right away. Rachna blinked and pulled out the magazine before looking inside. You're lucky. Seems like you've fired it a few times already, he remarked and threw the weapon away. Good job, Kronos. The little snake cried happily as he slithered up Rachna's shoulder again. That snake, Flavia muttered, then looked at the victims of the iron poison. Rachna, are they dead? No. At best, they're paralyzed. Kronos didn't inject a lethal dose. Though I am tempted to try and see if I can level up by killing fellow hosts, he stated and looked at the many firearms on the ground. He waved his hand and all of them were sucked inside his spatial ring. Better this than to let them belong to someone else, he thought. He then looked at Flavia again to see her staring at him with a worried expression. Why are you looking at me like that? He asked and she lowered her head. Alan glanced at her and furtively hinted his friend who scowled before relenting. Stop with that face, Flavia. I'm not losing grasp of reality if that's what you're afraid of. And if it ever happens to cross your mind, this situation isn't your fault whatsoever, he said, and she looked at him in the eyes. It's not like I'm going to start killing people on a whim, he continued and kicked the unconscious Hearts. Though this kind of guy definitely deserves it, he'll probably get what he deserves sooner or later, he said, and Flavia slowly nodded. Alan alternated between the two and sighed deeply. All right, stop being all gloomy. Well, except Rack. He's just like that. Flavia cracked a smile and Rachna shook his head with a stoic face before pulling a cigarette and lighting it up. He closed Obsidian Smoke with a snap and huffed a cloud of smoke. Let's move. The moment he said that, a scream spread throughout the entire area. Alan and Flavia looked toward the general direction of the source in surprise. It seemed to come from deep inside the forest. In contrast, Rachna appeared as if he hadn't heard the scream at all. He walked toward the dense and dark agglomerate of trees with his cigarette highlighting his position. Flavia and Alan looked at each other before following him as they started hearing gunshots. After leaving the tutorial stage, the cybernetic clown stepped into a dark room only for it to suddenly light up. He then sat at a circular table, which had faded into existence right in front of his eyes, where several other people were waiting. The odd thing about all of them was that their appearance wasn't clear and merely showed their silhouette covered in thick shadows. BDNV, you're late, Gray, one of the individuals spoke up. Unfortunately, I was forced to wait for the last host to arrive. I couldn't do anything about it. Gray's mouth displayed a flat line as he shrugged. Well, it's not that bad, is it? A lot of us are actually jealous, you know. Another one said. Jealous? Gray was puzzled. How so? Well, wasn't there an S+ potential in the group you oversee? It's the first in 100 years. The difference between a regular S and an S+ is more than big. How can we not be jealous? What? He uttered dumbly. I'm sorry, but I checked every single host assigned to me and the highest I saw was S. What are you talking about? The download log showed it clearly though, a childish voice resounded, coming from a silhouette clearly belonging to a child. Then I am as confused as you are. I made sure to not miss any. Gray suddenly stopped talking as he remembered something. There was indeed one host that he hadn't bothered to appraise. The same one that made him wait for hours. There's no way, right? In any case, a booming voice echoed. This time it came from the figure that had been sitting at the very end of the table and it grabbed everyone's attention. The initiation is over and the results this year are very promising. I wanted to deliberate with you ladies and gentlemen. What will this time's trial be? Why not just let them fight a boss like every other year? A feminine voice asked. Come on, Lily, we need something new. We even have an S plus this time, let's make it interesting, a rough and casual voice retorted. The corresponding figure then snapped his fingers. Ah. I know. Do you remember what they did 30 years ago? Why not try that out? One of the figures scowled. Do you mean the avian trial? Yeah, that one. Although the difficulty might reduce the numbers of admitted hosts this year, their potential should be proportionally better as well. I don't see a problem with it, the one at the edge of the table spoke again. All right. Do we all agree? He asked and everyone nodded. Then return to your groups and make the necessary preparations. Following those words, the participants of this meeting immediately disappeared and Gray left to arrange the trial. Chapter 13. Shadows. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A few minutes after the incident with Hearts, Rachna's group was already a few hundred meters away from the school. They were currently running through the forest with Rachna at the front, Alan at the back, and Flavia in between. Hey, Rach, in the end, why should we venture in the forest like this? Isn't it safer to stay in the school grounds for now? Alan asked and Rachna glanced over his shoulder. Or is it because of people like Hearts? It's not because of that, he replied. In my opinion, the most dangerous place we could be right now is precisely the school. Why? Flavia raised her voice. Well, I don't know how this works but, Rachna muttered before slowing down. The two behind him also stopped, a bit confused. Imagine a modern building in the middle of a forest, don't you think it makes a perfect target? Target for what? Alan responded with another question but Rachna didn't even need to speak for the answer to be provided. Loud rustles in the leaves sounded from the front and at least 10 figures walked out of the bushes and from behind the trees. High-pitched laughs suddenly echoed and both Flavia and Alan winced. The creatures that were in front of them were small, even smaller than kobolds. But they had a considerably fiercer look. Green skin, long noses, sharp teeth, spiked weapons and a surprisingly intimidating physique. Are those? Alan raised an eyebrow. Goblins. Looks like it, Rachna uttered and grabbed his scarf as the goblins slowly surrounded them. More of them were coming out from their flanks and rear. The trio gradually got closer to each other until they were back, staring at the goblins who were growing in number by the second. Shit, how many of them are going to come out? Alan grumbled as he pulled out a pair of gloves from his pockets. He put them on and Rachna also proceeded to transform Sonata to its Guandao form. Meanwhile, Pronos sneakily landed on the ground and used his camouflage. I understand now, Flavia said. This is what you meant. This entire forest is probably filled with these monsters. And all of them are probably rushing toward the school as we speak. If we had stayed there, we probably would have had to deal with hundreds if not thousands of them. Damn, Alan watched the goblins who were ready to attack at any moment. I hope that no one stayed behind. Rachna's eyes flashed as he silently cast appraisal. They're level 5. No skills. They're agile so be careful, he instructed and although they didn't know how he knew that, both Alan and Flavia nodded without hesitation. After his words, the forest suddenly fell silent. The goblins had stopped laughing all of a sudden but their grins hadn't disappeared in the slightest. After a few seconds, all of them kicked the ground at the same time. The first goblins to reach the trio were on Rachna's side of their formation. It was without saying that a flash of azure had instantly sent 3 heads flying. Smoke came out of the beheaded bodies as they fell on the ground. Alan whistled. Damn, you've become even more freaky, he remarked as he himself dealt with his side. He grabbed one of the goblin's head with one hand and beat it against another. The gloves he was wearing then glowed a little before he threw a punch that somehow dealt with 2 other monsters, as if his attack had produced a shockwave. At the same time, Flavia extended her hand and 2 of the goblins suddenly had their vision make a 180 degrees turn. Before they knew what was happening, they fell on the ground with their neck broken. Rachna, Alan, and even the green-skinned monsters abruptly stopped to look at her in shock. Eh? She exclaimed innocently. Did I do something wrong? Explanations later. Focus, Rachna finally said and stabbed two goblins with a perfectly straight thrust. He then stopped waiting for them to come at him and charged forward. He whirled Sonata with one hand and grabbed the head of one goblin with the other. He extended his nails and all of them pierced the creature's head. He retracted his claws as fast as he had taken them out and the goblin fell dead with 5 very small holes in its head. Alan caught that from the corner of his eyes but didn't comment on it. He punched one goblin in the stomach and sent it flying, knocking down a few of its brethren in the process. He then elbowed one monster coming from his side. He grasped its throat and threw it over his shoulder before stepping on its head, shattering its skull. Alan's movements couldn't be described as fast or smooth. In one sense, they were the opposite of Rachna's. While the latter was fast, accurate, and efficient, he was devastating. Each and every one of his attacks carried great force. His fists were slow but they always reached their target and made sure to crush the target. Then, there was Flavia. She hadn't moved from her spot since the beginning of the fight. All she did was look and wave her hands but goblins still fell without her even having to touch them. But it was obvious that, going by her expression and stance, it was gradually tiring her. Inevitably, one goblin finally managed to get close to her. As the creature was about to swing its weapon, Rachna thought he would have to throw Sonata to help her. But Flavia's necklace glowed and formed a spherical shield around her that blocked the goblin strike. She then pulled out a knife from her shirt and stabbed the green-skinned in the eye without hesitation. She then made a motion with her hand and the corpse collided on 2 rushing goblins. Alan laughed as he kicked one goblin to the ground. Wow, remind me to never get you angry. Don't worry, Flavia replied with a smile as she clenched her fist and broke the throat of one of the monsters. You won't forget. Alan chuckled nervously as the 3 of them got close to each other again. Their surroundings were littered with corpses and covered in green blood. There was only one goblin standing and as Flavia was about to finish it off, it suddenly collapsed and Pronos revealed himself on its back. Rachna wasn't surprised but it was another story for Alan and Flavia. Both of them also noticed how many of the dead goblins had bluish glowing veins. You as well, little guy, remind me to not piss you off, Alan uttered and Pronos hissed with a smirk. Ahem, anyway, there were quite a lot of them, huh? I just reached level 6. Flavia followed, me as well. I reached level 7, Rachna added and his 2 friends stared at him. Why am I not surprised? Alan quipped. Though how did you do it? I'm pretty sure I killed every kobold I found but I still needed 10 points to get to level 6. I just left the school's area and hunted other kobolds in the forest, Rachna answered as he picked up Pronos again. Dude, I also did that, the blonde deadpanned and Rachna shrugged. I don't know then. Meh, more importantly, what the heck was that, Flavia? Alan turned toward his former teacher. Well, Flavia scratched her cheek sheepishly. I'm not sure how to explain. I can do it for you, Rachna stated and she looked at him confusedly. Without saying anything, he cast appraisal and her status appeared in front of him. Name. Flavia Celia age. 24 level. 6, 5/60ths, race. Female human title. Nil potential. S attributes. Strength. 2 endurance. 3 speed. 2.2 dexterity. 5 intelligence. 12 luck. 4 available points. 1 equipped items. Necklace of Bravery. Spend 5 MP to erect a shield around the user. Cooldown. 3 minutes. Statistics. Stamina. 15/15.2 MP 117/120 swiftness. 10 agility. 12.2 senses. 22.2 ATR cap 28.2 attack. 16.7 defense. 11 magic attack. 36 MP regen. 1.08 per minute proficiencies. Cooking, LV.9, teaching, LV. 6, judo, LV.4, magic skills. Unawakened. Cognitive skills, passive. Fatigue resistance, LV.7, fear resistance, LV.2, pain resistance, LV.2, spontaneous skills, active. None nirvana skills. Telekinesis, LV.1. One of the most common spiritual abilities awakened as a nirvana skill. It has the potential to even bend spatial laws. Current lift. Intelligence *5, kg. This is a spiritual skill fueled by psychic energy, thus no mana is involved in the process. But beware, overuse is severely precarious. The range of manipulation is only limited by the host's imagination and control. Unique or racial traits? None. Rachna was slightly impressed. Not only was her potential merely a step below his, but she also had a nirvana skill. From his understanding, this wasn't anything near mediocre. Her mana regeneration was also incredibly high. Telekinesis, that's a very useful power. Did you awaken it during the initiation? Rachna asked, and Flavia slowly nodded. Yes, but, how did you know? I have a skill that lets me see the status of others. Oh, so that's what you used on those goblins, Alan exclaimed. So, basically, Flavia awakened her magic before us or something like that. No, what she has is a nirvana skill. I believe it is in a completely different league compared to normal magic, Rachna retorted. What's a nirvana skill? Alan immediately inquired. From what the shopkeeper told me, it's a very rare and powerful ability that is most of the time innate to a host. It was Flavia who answered. She also said that mine was quite special since it doesn't need mana. Then what does it need? Wait, Rachna interrupted their conversation, and they both looked at him. Let's get out of here for now. The blood may attract more enemies for all we know. Let's find some place safer before having this discussion. There are few things I want to talk about this system too. They nodded in agreement, and the trio started running from their location, all while ignoring the occasional screams that would come from deep inside the forest. It was as if their dying voice was augmented on purpose to haunt the participants. Meanwhile, a black-haired girl stared at the goblins in front of her with her crimson eyes. The monsters charged at her with high-pitched shouts. She watched them with a detached expression until one of them was about to hit her. The area was suddenly covered in darkness, and when light returned, the goblins had been stabbed by shadow spikes, all unconditionally dead. The girl sighed and looked at the sun, which was starting to set down. Why did that demon send me here? She voiced a question that she was painfully aware wouldn't be answered, and vanished between the trees, leaving the dissolving shadows behind her. Chapter 14. First, how you are listening at novelfull.audio. As night was falling, after encountering a few more goblins, Rachna's group had reached the section of the forest bordering the mountains and found a small cave in the cliff to settle in for the night. When they were sure that the cave wasn't a sort of nest, Rachna spoke up. There's something I want to do outside. You two stay here until I come back, he told his two companions, who looked at him in confusion. Flavia scowled. Where are you going? It's not safe to go out alone, it's getting dark too. We can come with you if it's important. You sounded like housewife saying that. Alan was cut off by an elbow to the sides. He groaned and kneeled on the group pathetically. Flavia cleared her throat with a faint blush, and Rachna blinked at his friend wriggling on the ground. Don't worry. I can take care of myself, he declared, and turned around to leave the cave. It's better for you to stay here. Don't think that I didn't notice how taxing your power was. Be sure to protect her, Alan. Sure thing. Alan raised his hand shakily from the ground and Rachna nodded before rushing back inside the forest. Flavia sighed. He's too reckless. Nah, more like, he just doesn't care. Alan straightened his back and sat up. For as long as I have known him, he has never feared anything. You probably never saw him scared ever since you met him, did you? Flavia could only smile helplessly. That was true. The only time she could see Rachna express anything similar to fear intensity-wise is when he switches, huh? Alan complimented her line of thought when he recognized her sour expression. Don't worry too much. I know the old master told us his dual personality could be dangerous for his psyche, but I'm sure he can deal with it. Flavia nodded slowly. You're right, *****. Meanwhile, Rachna was running through the dense forest with Pronos casually lying down on his head and feeling the wind. What he wanted to do was simply cut a tree or two to, 1, gather firewood for the night and 2, evaluate his current strength in a bit more detail. Once he deemed it to be far enough from the cave to not attract anyone with the noise, he chose a regular-sized tree among the many and stood in front of it. The first thing he did was cast appraisal. Until now, he had never used this ability on something other than humans, monsters, or items. His small experiment was to see if it produced any result on purely inanimate objects. And, as he expected, a prompt appeared in front of him. Followed by a surprising but pleasing notification. A 100-year-old oak tree. It shows signs of healthy development but is slightly leaning to its north side. The trunk has been infused with very minute amounts of magical energy and is relatively stronger than normal trees. Blunt resistance value. 50 slashing resistance value. 20. Ding. Appraisal's level increased to 4. Depending on the difference between the user and the target's level, a personal description of the person will now appear on the status. Although Rachna was happy about his skill getting stronger, he had already run out of ideas to level it up. If he understood correctly, appraisal required a different condition to be upgraded every time. I'll think about it later, he said inwardly before pointing 2 of his fingers at the trunk. His claws instantly came out and pierced the tree, albeit by only a few centimeters. Rachna retracted them afterward and mused. Well, I guess this is a reasonable piercing power. It's enough to go easily through flesh anyway. Rachna mused about it for a bit more before going to his next test. Pronos, take some distance, he warned, and the little snake nodded before slithering away. This time, Rachna deactivated Ulvia's illusion and his ears and tail came back. He sighed deeply and tapped into the throbbing sensation in his chest. His heart started beating quicker and louder every second. His eyes glowed and his canines grew. His bones made cracking sounds and suddenly every bird and animal in the vicinity started running away in fear. When the sun completely disappeared from the sky, the howl of a wolf resounded throughout the entire forest. The sound was low and booming, like a mix between a howl and a growl. Almost every host heard it and shuddered. When it faded away, there was a brief moment of silence before countless other howls echoed. From the depths of the forest, apparent wolf packs were responding to the call. The beast singing finally stopped after several minutes and everyone was on edge. Meanwhile, Rachna exhaled as his body had returned to normal. He looked at himself and frowned at the fact that he was entirely naked. The only thing he was wearing was his scarf. What had happened was that during his transformation, he had hastily put his clothes inside his spatial ring before they could be ripped apart. This might be annoying. I wonder if, he muttered to himself, and his ring shined for a second and his clothes returned exactly to how they were. He checked if they were actually placed correctly and not upturned or anything before nodding in satisfaction. This ring is more useful than I thought. SSSH. As he was getting lost in thoughts, Pronos' hiss jolted him awake. His small partner was staring at the obscurities of the forest. It was then that he could hear noises getting closer and closer to them. Ragnar squinted and picked up a large chunk of wood as his feet. He put it on his shoulder and picked up Pronos before letting him get inside his scarf. "Let's leave," he mumbled and kicked the ground. Behind him, what was once a robust tree was nothing more than a lump of leaves and wood pieces with claw marks on them. When Ragnar returned to the cave with the illusion over his wolf features, he immediately used the glaive form of Sonata to cut apart the wood. He then used obsidian smoke to light up a fire. As the trio was sitting around the fire, Alan spoke, "So. What now?" "We share information," Ragnar replied and looked at him, silently using appraisal. "Name?" Alan River. Age? 18. Level? 6. Race? Male. Human. Title? Nil. Potential? S. Attributes? Strength? 10. Endurance? 7. Speed? 3. Dexterity? 3.4. Intelligence? 2.4. Luck? 2 available points? 1 equipped items? Shock gloves. A pair of enchanted gloves that are capable of generating momentum with each strike. When the momentum is strong enough, a shock wave is released. Perks. Attack +10 and defense +10, limited to the hands. Statistics. Stamina. 30.4 MP. 24 Swiftness. 10.8 Agility. 9.8 Senses. 15.8 ATR Cap. 27.8 Attack. 59.9, 49.9 +10, Defense. 41, 31 +10, Magic Attack. 7.2 MP Regen. 0.10 per minute Proficiencies. Mixed Martial Arts, LV.7, Drawing, LV.6, Magic Skills. Unawakened. Cognitive Skills, Passive. Pain Resistance, LV.5, Fear Resistance, LV.4, Fatigue Resistance, LV.3, Spontaneous Skills, Active. None unique or racial traits. Ion Auto, Sustainable Nanomachines. Automatically kills foreign organisms and allows rapid improvement in body strength as well as the use of more muscle cells. Photographic Memory. A rare aptitude to instantly memorize something one has seen. Note: Alan River is an orphan from a young age. He considers Ragnar Ziora his irreplaceable best friend. His relationship with the latter allowed him to train under his uncle and acquire military-grade nanomachines from him. He's usually a man with a bright personality, his past experiences have made him stronger mentally. What Ragnar saw in his friend's status didn't surprise him. He knew what Alan was capable of for the most part. His potential was well deserved. On the other hand, the recent addition to his appraisal was quite interesting. This note could become a very useful ability in the future if it worked on strangers as well. First of all, there's something I want to verify, Ragnar began, and they both listened to him. Alan already told me, but did you two complete the initiation, and if yes, did you leave the school grounds? Flavia answered by shaking her head. I didn't finish. Although I'm quite sure I could have defeated the rider, the awakening of my telekinesis tired me too much. Ragnar nodded, then turned toward Alan and he shrugged. As I said, I did finish the initiation and I did explore the forest around for an hour or so. Why? Did you find anything out of the ordinary there? Huh. What kind? A special enemy? No. There were only kobolds no matter where I went. I see, Ragnar closed his eyes after confirming his suspicions. Alright, next is to identify our personal capabilities. Summarized, I would say Alan is a robust damage dealer, Flavia is both a support and a rear-line mage, Pronos here is a swift and tanky assassin, and as for me, I am a fast damage dealer. Yeah, I guess that's pretty accurate, Alan said with a hand on his chin. Only you and I can fight up close. I guess we should maintain a 2.1 formation in most cases with your little pet as the wild card, he said, then looked at Flavia and his eyes lit up. Now that I think about it, Teach, how is it to use magic? It's not magic. I think, she retorted and looked at her hands. And I don't know, to be honest. It just feels natural. All I need to do is control my thoughts and I can snap the neck of my target. Alan chuckled wryly at her choice of word. You said that you didn't use mana too, it uses psyche instead, Rachna answered for her. It's not really explained on her skill description, but I think you can imagine it to be like cerebral waves. That would mean that she will get tired mentally instead of using mana. That's still awesome. I really want to awaken my magic now. Alan exclaimed with palpable excitement. Flavia giggled at his childish behavior and Rachna shook his head with a sigh. Apparently, you will have to wait to finish this tutorial first to do that. Alan snorted. True. In any case, what about you, Rach? We're not like you, you know. We can't see your status. How did you even get that skill? It just appeared, Rachna shrugged. I believe an analytical behavior is required to unlock it. If you inspect a foe's particularities to the very last detail perceivable, you might get it. Well, I'm not sure about you, Alan, but I'm pretty sure Flavia is capable of doing it. Hey, are you insinuating I'm too dumb for it? Alan grumbled. Yes. Other than that, I have the proficiencies that you would expect with spear mastery at the top. My little personal condition that you know of has also become a trait somehow and then. I too have a nirvana skill. Damn, really? Alan exclaimed dejectedly. Am I the only one without one? Don't be too disappointed, Flavia tried to cheer him up. My shopkeeper said that it was extremely rare to have one. Indeed. Additionally, you're also an S-class potential like us, Rachna added. You guys are not helping. It's like I'm being told I'm doing good in life while you both are millionaires. That's an interesting analogy, Rachna deadpanned and Flavia chuckled. Anyway, let's rest. There's no point in going over everything today. As for my nirvana skill, I'll keep it a secret for now. Of course, you will, Alan groused. Flavia smiled and stood up to sit against the wall of the cave next to Rachna. She closed her eyes and whispered, You don't mind. Rachna glanced at her and shook his head before also closing his eyes. Alan watched the two of them and snorted before doing the same thing. Then, a few minutes later, Rachna had one regretful thought. I should have bought a blanket. Chapter 15. Wolf King. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The moon was halfway through its cycle when Rachna woke up. He first looked at Flavia, who was leaning against his shoulder, then saw his tail unhidden by the illusion. Without making a single noise, he slowly got up from his position and guided the sleeping Flavia to lie down. He took out his scarf and put it under her head so that she wouldn't have to sleep on the hard ground. Next to her was Pronos, who also hadn't woken up. Rachna's high dexterity had made him incredibly good at handling small movements. He could probably carry her and run a few kilometers without disturbing her sleep in the slightest. When he was done with that, he glanced at Alan, who was borderline snoring, and exited the cave. When he came out, his attention was pulled by the moon. He squinted and started thinking. If he was a werewolf now, what would the full moon do to him? He was tempted to ask Alexa, but that wasn't his current objective. Just like earlier, he once again reached for the feeling in his chest and triggered his shapeshift. His canines grew, his eyes didn't glow this time but instead slowly became those of a wolf. Midnight fur grew on his skin and his spatial ring flickered to store his clothes. He gradually got on all fours and 8 new appendages suddenly grew near his already grown tail. Rachna immediately felt a weird and instinctive urge to howl but held it in. It wouldn't do any good to wake up everyone around. When he was done with his shapeshift, he tried to take a step forward only to fall on his side. Nice, he muttered, confirming at the same time that he could still speak, although it was unrecognizable. He looked at himself and raised an eyebrow. To start off, he wasn't as big as the wolf he fought, but he certainly wasn't small. One could say that he was simply human-sized, just a bit bigger than normal wolves. Then, the second thing that bemused him was his tails. For some reason, he had now 9 of them, but a quick check of his status showed him that the only difference was his speed going from 9 to 15. Alexa, why are my tails all unlocked? They are not unlocked, Rachna. To be exact, they are just manifestations. I cannot affirm with confidence, but I would presume that the form you're currently in has the full structure of the 9-tailed wolf genome without a human half. So, the tails are there because it is as your current race should be, but they in fact don't carry any power. You're starting to be useful. Thanks. You are welcome. Rachna stood up again and tried to regain balance with his new physiology. Since his dexterity was still as high as ever, it only took him a few tries to be perfectly in tune with his limbs. All right, a growl-like voice came out of his mouth. He hunched forward and kicked the ground at full strength. His paws left an imprint on the soil, and within the next few seconds, he had already traveled at least 100 meters. His vision almost seemed to slow down as he jumped over the bushes and even over the branches of the trees that were at least 3 meters high. He continued to run for at least 10 minutes before he finally put a brake on his sprint. He voiced and sat down just like any other Lupin would. This speed is very nice. The werewolf form gives me a 50% boost to everything except luck, but I can't overlook this one. The additional 20% to speed are not to be underestimated. As he was ruminating, Rachna unconsciously lifted his paw to lick it, only to freeze halfway and stare at his leg. I guess this comes with animal instincts as well, he commented before opening his status and finally taking a look at the title he gained from killing the 9-tailed wolf. Legendary Slayer. There are very few beasts that deserve the nomination of legendary. They are powerful, domineering, and rulers of their brethren. This title is a medal for those who have managed to subjugate such leaders of nature. Title effect: Attack, magic attack, and defense plus 10% against legendary creatures and above. Note: certain titles can have effects on the relationship with dwellers of the system. I see, this probably won't be useful in the near future, Rachna remarked to himself. He was about to go back to the cave and sleep when his ear twitched and his nose picked up something. He stopped in his tracks, then looked at his left with sharp eyes. As soon as he did so, a wolf with gray fur and a scar over one of its eyes came out from a bush. Compared to Rachna, the animal was actually quite small, but it didn't seem to be fearful. Afterward, following it, many others came out one after the other. An entire pack of wolves had abruptly appeared, and the only thing they did was stare in complete silence. Rachna wouldn't have been as puzzled as he was if it wasn't for one thing. He could guess that they had looked for him after his little stunt in his werewolf form, but what he couldn't understand was their motive. He always had full trust in his instincts, and this system had only served to strengthen that trust. And, right now, he knew for sure that these wolves weren't hostile. He frowned at them, and his new bestial automatisms made him growl, flashing his fangs. What do you want? Then, completely out of his expectations, every single one of these predators of nature lowered their head to him and even somewhat kneeled by bending their front legs. It was at that moment that the system made itself known. Through meeting several conditions, you have learned a new skill, intimidation. Intimidation, LV.1. By flaring your magic energy, you can ethereally release the weight of your full power on your targets. Those who are weaker than you and are not higher leveled than you will be dealt a psychological blow. The higher the skill level, the more people will get affected and the more damage will be done to their mental. Cost: 1 MP per minute. Rachna was already surprised enough, but another prompt appeared afterward. The wolves are in awe of your appearance. They revere the 9-tailed wolf and have acknowledged you as their leader. Congratulations. You have acquired a new title, Wolf King. Wolf King. Only the mightiest of wolves can be given the designation of king. The king of wolves can command hundreds of his brethren to die for him with but a mere grunt. Title effect. Intimidation skills will ignore levels when used on wolf-type beings, and there is a chance for the host to even suppress stronger foes. Title skill. Call of Fangs. Note: all titles can be equipped at the same time and do not need to be swapped. However, the possibility of unequipping one still exists. Rachna wasn't even sure how to react. Is this title a privilege of nine-tailed creatures? It would seem likely, he thought, then looked at the wolves gathered in front of him. Return to your turfs for now. I'll call you if needed. The pack immediately complied and disappeared into the woods. They didn't seem to have problems understanding human speech. Rachna sat down again as his 9 tails wagged around him freely and focused on the skill given to him by the title. The system responded to him and showed him its description. Designation. Skill/spontaneous skill name. Call of Fangs tier. Special learning requirements. Wolf King description. When the user activates this skill, their howl will call every suitable wolf in the vicinity to come to battle. When there isn't any suitable target, the user can also summon shadow wolves with a level matching the quantity of mana spent on each. The shadow wolves level cannot be higher than the summoner, and they cannot remain longer than 5 minutes if not killed. Is this what they call overpowered? Rachna muttered dully. Basically, if I were to summon a level 7 shadow wolf right now, it would cost me 7 mana points. Affirmative, Alexa answered. I see. Then I guess I can only summon 5 of them for now. Or I could also summon 40 level ones. I guess the threat of this skill depends on how strong each shadow wolf actually is, he mumbled, and then couldn't help but yawn as his body requested him to rest. He stood up and stretched his body. He readied himself and then started sprinting back toward the cave. Since he had already gotten used to the feeling of this body, he was even faster than before. When he arrived, he didn't enter the cave but chose a relatively close tree and jumped on a branch before lying down. He laid his head on his crossed paws as his tails waved with the wind. He was taking the occasion to sleep in wolf form and get used to it. He also didn't want to get back inside since he would have to use an illusion to hide his features again and it would waste mana. Although he didn't mind revealing his abilities to his 2 companions, he always had been taught to keep as many secrets as possible. Not out of vanity but out of vigilance. Life was like a card game. Every time you learn something new, you draw a new card to your hand. But what would the point of the game be if you carelessly revealed it? When you have many hidden cards, you'll notice that there will always be at least one that you can rely on to win at the very end. Or so he said. Rachna huffed and his ear twitched. He opened one of his purple eyes and spotted Pronos coming out of the cave half asleep. The little snake then proceeded to go up the tree his owner was on before getting comfortable on his back. Little guy, did you just sleepwalk so that you could use me as your bed? Rachna didn't get any response, proving to him that Pronos truly was asleep. He didn't know if he should find it cute or annoying. Then, before he could get some shut-eye himself, he saw 2 goblins slowly creeping their way toward the cave. This night is starting to tick me off, he muttered inwardly, and he activated one of his newest skills. At that exact moment, the 2 goblins suddenly froze. They began to sweat and their sight gradually turned toward a certain tree, a branch to be exact. There, they saw nothing but the silhouette of 9 tails forming a half-dot circle and a pair of daunting purple eyes as well as eerily white fangs within the darkness. They instantly threw away their weapons and ran away while crying in fear. Intimidation has successfully affected 2 targets. Fear debuff induced. Intimidation increased to level 2. Rachna snorted and finally went back to sleep. Chapter 16. Avian Trial. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The sun was rising and the morning fog was still present when a loud thud resounded that made several birds fly away. Eh? What? Where am I? Who am I? Alan screamed as he was jolted awake. He blinked at his surroundings and saw Flavia rubbing her eyes while holding Rachna's scarf in her hand. What was that sound? Rachna! She uttered and walked out of the cave. Alan groaned and laid down again while complaining about those damn early risers. When Flavia was out, she yawned a bit, then spotted Rachna lying down on the ground and staring at the sky with an expressionless expression. His clothes were messy and Pronos looked like he had just been through a traumatic experience. What happened? What was that sound? It was a boar. A boar. Yes, a boar. Positively. A boar. Ran into the tree and then left. Very quickly, he replied coolly, and Pronos stared at him incredulously. He stared back. Little guy, even I have my pride. I will never admit that I just fell from a tree while sleeping. Pronos deadpanned and Rachna responded in kind until Flavia crouched next to him. He sighed and sat up as the little snake coiled around his neck. Flavia smiled and handed him Sonata. Thank you for this. You're welcome, he said, and wore his scarf again, much to the pleasure of Pronos, who had gotten used to it being his little home. Is Alan still asleep? I think. That noise woke him up, but he probably fell asleep again. Well, no wonder he has low-level fatigue resistance, he commented. Really? How low? Level 3. To clarify, mine is level 7 and yours is level 6. I see. Does that mean the resistances are something that everyone has? Most likely. Pain, fear, and fatigue resistance. These 3 passive skills might be the only ones available to normal humans, he said, and looked at the sky again. That aside, while I was resting on the grass just before, I saw something interesting. What do you mean? Flavia asked as she followed his line of sight. She couldn't see much because of the fog, but her attention was caught by the outlines of the mountain tops. Her eyes slowly widened as she noticed the countless small silhouettes standing on them. Are those eagles? Rachna finished for her. I can use appraisal from here. For now, the highest level I saw was 2. But there are hundreds if not thousands of them up there. And I can feel them staring at us. Or more specifically, everyone down here. Do you think that they're targeting us? I can't say, but if this entire forest is surrounded by a chain of mountains and that every single one of them has thousands of eagles perching on their peak, I don't even want to imagine the kind of trap it would be if all of them attacked at once. Level 1 they may be, but their number is nothing less than terrifying, Rachna affirmed calmly, and Flavia inevitably turned nervous. After a few moments of silence, a yawn was heard. What's going on? Alan groggily asked as he came out of the cave. Rachna stood up and dusted his clothes. We were talking about the possibility of a downpour of birds, he replied, and Alan blinked. A what? There, Flavia just pointed at the sky instead of explaining. The fog was starting to disperse and Alan easily spotted the eagles this time. Okay. But what do we do with that information? I don't have an umbrella for that, you know. Rachna snorted and cracked his neck. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it before walking away. Isn't it obvious? We're going up. Wait, what? Alan froze. Are you saying that you want to not only climb a mountain that is quite obviously very steep but also go and see hundreds of massive birds that may or may not attack at sight? Very nicely summarized, Rachna uttered as he continued to get farther away from them. We're going to follow this mountain wall until there's a viable path upward. Let's get moving. Alan opened his mouth wide as his friend disappeared behind the trees. The guy didn't even stop a second to wait for us. He shouted internally. Flavia sighed along with him. Well, we were the ones who decided to put our lives in his hands. There's nothing we can complain about, she said. Just take a look behind you, she added before leaving to follow Rachna. Behind. Alan muttered and turned around. His eyes immediately widened. There were at least a dozen of spiked weapons on the ground that noticeably belonged to goblins. Rachna had kept watch even in his sleep. Even with his eyes closed, or his senses shut down, he still could somehow sense threats approaching, and all of them had been chased away like the first two. He also had leveled up his intimidation skill again during the night. Alan scratched his head and ran off to catch up. Meanwhile, the group of students led by the blonde-haired teen from the day before came up with the same idea as Rachna and were searching for a path. After spending the night near a river, they also had spotted the eagles on top of the mountain. "Hey, bro, are you sure it's a good idea?" A young girl spoke to the leader. She possessed the same features as him and one would easily guess they were siblings if not twins. And, just like the people around her and her apparent brother, she had a tattoo of a white phoenix next to her collarbone. "Yes, I'm sure, Leia," her brother replied as if it was obvious. Leia scowled. "Could you at least explain why? We've been going in this blind since yesterday. I don't want to die today." "I agree with her on this," Lays, an impressively buff guy for a high schooler, added as he walked to them. "I'll still follow you no matter what happens, and I'm sure it's the same for the gang, but I think it's best to give us an explanation." Lays sighed. "All right. Guys. Let's take a break. At this point, you all better listen up. I don't want to repeat myself if any of you has a question too." "Yes, boss." Everyone shouted in response and regrouped from their formation. They stood in a circle around their leader, in case a monster would appear while he was talking. Lays leaned against a tree and crossed his arms. "Just think about the situation. This shitty mission we got doesn't explain how to find the exit. At first, I thought it was simply hidden somewhere, but I doubt it now." "Why?" Leia asked. "Because this place is small," Lays answered and pointed at the chain of mountains. "This entire forest is surrounded by that, and the area within isn't actually that big. I don't believe that there's anything worthwhile beyond the mountains, so we should be able to find the exit in a few days at most, and that's still being pessimistic." "Well, that would be true if finding it was really all that mattered. For me, it sounds too easy. There must be a condition, a prerequisite, or something, to update this mission we have right now. Like, for example, defeat a certain boss to open the exit, or resolve some puzzle. I really don't know. What I know though is that those eagles up there aren't normal, and their appearance overnight only makes it even more suspicious. That's why we're going there. It's our only hint, so we better follow it while we can." "That makes sense. I guess," Leia muttered. Lays shrugged and signaled everyone to move again. They all nodded and formed a new formation again. Anyone would have been able to tell that their movements were very disciplined, almost as if it was an actual military march. In any case, we're probably not the only ones going there. Ziora is most likely going too, for one." "Ziora? Who's that?" Lays was about to answer when he saw someone emerge from behind the trees. He furrowed his eyebrows when he could discern their appearance. Long, almost wavy, black hair, crimson eyes, and a figure that couldn't pass unnoticed. The two of them made eye contact the moment they noticed each other. Lays slowly reached for the katana at his belt without losing sight of her. "Who are you?" he inquired gravely. "What's wrong, boss?" "She's just the same as us, no?" one of the gang's members exclaimed. "No," the buff guy instantly refuted. He also was on guard. "I'm familiar with pretty much everyone in our school. I've never seen her, and she hasn't the appearance of someone easily forgettable." Everyone gradually realized the situation, as none of them even had the smallest recollection about someone as pretty as her. The girl in question clicked her tongue and a swirl of darkness manifested itself around her hand. "I have no reason to fight you. So kindly forget about me. Lays looked at one of his members. He was a pretty average-looking teen with short black hair, but he had a few unique features such as his height and his uncanny dead-fish eyes concealed under a pair of glasses. How is it, Dan? Dan pushed his glasses up and scrutinized the woman. No data. Either she has a way of countering my skill or she's too high level. What I can say though, he squinted and he couldn't help but feel nervous despite himself. Her race isn't displayed as human. The person in question raised an eyebrow. Then what is she? Lays urged him. She's a. His answer was interrupted by a sudden earthquake followed by a booming sound. Lays raised his head and saw something surface on the horizon. It was right in the center of the circular area delimited by the mountains and appeared to be coming out of the earth. A short moment later, the earthquake stopped and everyone was shocked. Something had indeed emerged from underground and it stood tall, taller than the mountains. The heck is that? Someone muttered and every host scattered around the plateau zero showed similar reactions. The unknown structure was in fact a statue. A giant statue of an eagle with its wings spread out and on top of its head, there was another eagle. But this one was clearly alive. It wasn't as big as the statue but it was easily bigger than a literal house. The trial has been initiated. The system's voice echoed and the tutorial mission was updated. Tutorial mission. Hunt escape description. The avian trial. A hunt ceremony has been initiated. The statue of the eagle god is the exit and can only be opened with the souls of its descendants. Objective. Eagles will fly down and attack at sight. Once killed, they will drop a crystallized soul. 50 per head are needed to open the exit. Time limit. 12 hours. Note. When time runs out, hosts with less than 50 souls will be disposed of. Stealing from fellow hosts is permitted. Additional information. The 3 first contestants to go through the exit will be granted the title, Crowned Seedling, and the one with the most souls will be granted the title, Soul Hunter. Default rewards. Access to the first plateau, 20 tallies per soul. Chapter 17. Hunger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A few minutes earlier. Alan wheezed as he grabbed onto a crack on the stone. Hey, can we just, take a break? He uttered between breaths. Don't exaggerate. You have 7 in endurance. Flavia doesn't complain, why would you? Rachna deadpanned while climbing the mountain wall. Nothing about him hinted at the fact that he was tired. Expect maybe a few occasional sweat drops. Shut up, Rak. Dexterity is more suited for this kind of shit, he retorted. Also. Of course, Teach isn't complaining, she's using her damn cheat to borderline fly. Ever since they had started climbing the mountain almost an hour and a half ago, Flavia had been using her telekinesis to very efficiently make her body lighter. Although she wasn't at the level where she could fly yet, it basically made it very easy for her body to perform any activity. And you too, Rak. I know you can somehow extend your nails and you're using it to literally grab on anything while I'm over here killing myself trying to find footholds. You people aren't being considerate of ungifted people, he grumbled and sighed. His eyes then coincidentally crossed Pronos, who was smirking at him from his comfy spot under Sonata. A vein popped on Alan's forehead. You damn reptile, stop whining, we're close, Rachna muttered, and half a minute later, his hand touched the top. He pulled himself up with a short shout and Flavia followed him. She even somehow sent her entire body over the ledge and very gently landed on the ground on her 2 legs. Rachna looked around and saw how the eagles had gotten away from him the moment he got close. But none of them had flown off. All of them were still here and he stood in front of a literal sea of eagles staring at him in an eerie silence. He also noticed that what lay beyond the mountains was nothing more but water. This tutorial was actually being held on an island. 10 seconds later, Alan exhaled as he finally got his head over the ledge. So. He uttered with his arms crossed on the ground. What do we do now? He asked with a frown. Ragnar squinted and with a thought, his knife appeared in his hand. He flicked his wrist and it flew straight to an eagle's head before going through it. LV.3 Eagle killed. Requirement for level up updated. Current progress. 31/70ths. You are the first to acquire a crystallized soul. The avian trial has been initiated. Immediately afterward, the ground started shaking and Alan nearly fell off. He hastily climbed up and looked at the forest below with wide eyes. From their perspective, the appearance of the eagle god statue looked even more impressive than it already was. Then, the trio also got the mission update prompt from the system and the eagles all began to flap their wings and take off. All except the closest to Ragnar's group. Ragnar glanced at the wave of birds going down toward the forest, then looked back at the ones surrounding him. I see, coming here was just a trigger. And the reward for it is a bonus of easily attainable crystallized souls. Is that so? Alan muttered with an obviously satiric tone and reluctantly took a stance. Was it worth the climb though? Who knows, Ragnar replied as Sonata transformed in his hand. Pronos jumped down and hissed at the eagles. Flavia waved her hand and made the first move. In the split of a second, 2 eagles had their neck twisted. The others then started to take altitude, but before all of them could get out of range, both Ragnar and Alan sliced and crushed 6 of them. Then, the golden dot-eyed birds plunged back once they were high enough. Ragnar narrowly dodged one, aiming at his head, and elbowed it while it was still in midair. Alan casually caught its own and Flavia literally forced it to crash on the ground in front of her. I don't want to sound cocky, but these birds are weak, Alan commented as he looked at the flock circling them in the sky. Don't relax yet, Ragnar said as he pierced one eagle's head with his claws. This skill of his had hit level 2 while climbing the mountain and now dealt even more damage. I know that you're not aware, but the attributes of these eagles have slowly been increasing ever since the statue appeared. Their average level has even increased by 1. What? You're kidding, right? Alan was wide-eyed. How fast? Flavia inquired with a small frown. She herself had noticed that it was getting slightly harder to kill the eagles as time passed. Her telekinesis gave her an unexpectedly good sensitive feedback. The strength she needed to snap their neck had been increased by at least 2 kilos. For now, it seems to be around 0.01 every second, Ragnar estimated as he pulled back. He grunted as another eagle brushed past him. A normal eagle's optimal plunging speed is already near 160 km per hour. If they keep getting faster, it'll get too hard to dodge, he thought. Shit, isn't that a bit too unfair? They'll become invincible at this rate, Alan uttered. However, I don't think it's time-based, Ragnar added as Pronos got back on his shoulder. Although the little snake had managed to get a few kills while they were still on the ground, he couldn't do anything else since they weren't targeting him anymore. What do you mean? Do you think it's something else that makes them stronger? Their number, Flavia's eyes flashed as 2 bloodied birds fell at her feet. The hunt has probably started down there as well. When their number decreases, their individual strength goes up. This is probably what's happening right now. Ragnar nodded. That would be the most likely explanation. He then looked at the circle of birds above him and suddenly thought of something. Alexa, can you tell me what's the range of the spatial ring Caliph gave me? And is it possible to store dust in it? And if yes, could I take out all of it in one go? The range is 10 meters and the answer to your 2 other questions is yes. There is no limit to the quantity you can store at once, and the ring only needs you to imagine how much you want taken out and in what way. Alan, Ragnar raised his voice immediately after. Are your gloves charged? Huh. Alan was startled. He kicked the eagle near him and glanced at his glowing gloves before turning toward his friend. Yes. Why? Punch the ground as hard as you can. The more destruction the better. Alan scowled but complied nonetheless as he prepared to deal out the strongest punch he could muster. Flavia, support his momentum as he punches, and at my signal, focus your telekinesis under my feet, Rachna instructed, and she nodded. A second after, Alan inhaled and his fist collided with the mountain top. He grimaced a bit because of the pain, then his gloves released a shockwave. The stone broke apart into pieces and a cloud of dust was raised. The eagles screeched and flew up to avoid it. Now! Rachna shouted and felt a certain power gather around his legs. He ran right into the middle of the dust cloud and crouched before jumping as high as he could. At the same time, his ring flashed and both the rubble and the dust disappeared in an instant. The eagles watched as a human jumped high enough to get above them, and before they could react, a layer of dust and rocks suddenly appeared above them. But it wasn't over a large area, one could even say it was quite compacted. At best, this improvised meteorite would only kill a few eagles. However, while still in midair, Rachna used his lighter to trigger Sonata a second time. The guandao glowed and changed shape to form an azure arc. Then a blue string emerged from one tip and, as if it was alive, went for the other tip. The string flickered and Rachna pulled it toward his shoulder. A cyan arrow then flared into existence on his newly created bow. It was made of pure energy and was causing full combustion with the air. When Flavia saw that, her face grew pale. "That's reckless!" she shouted and ran away. "Alan, get on the ground." Rachna squinted and released the arrow before the cloud of dust could disperse too much. An azure trail of light was then shot and reached the cloud under a second. Flavia jumped behind a boulder with Alan and they covered their heads and ears as a deafening explosion resounded. The mountain's top was struck by a powerful shockwave and the eagles, if not killed on the spot, plummeted toward the ground and died. Rachna grunted as the shock blew him away and Pronos clung to his neck. He rapidly dropped from the sky and could only curse when he saw that he was not going to land back on the mountain top but go straight down toward the ocean. He spun during his fall to get his momentum back under control and put Sonata back around his neck. His nails became sharper without extending, his fangs grew longer, and then his tail and ears reappeared on him as the illusion gave out. While falling, Rachna did his best to steer himself back toward the mountain, and when he reached it, he planted his claws in the stone to break his fall. He growled unconsciously and some faint traces of fur appeared on his skin. It took him nearly 100 meters of distance to completely stop his momentum. When he was completely safe, it was Pronos who sighed in relief for him. After that, Rachna's features returned to normal as Ulvia's veil was activated again. The semi-dot transformation he had just used was a certain quirk he had managed to make out the day before. He could somewhat control the process of his werewolf transformation and stop it midway. In that case, he could retain a human figure, but his power boost fell from 50% to 20%. Rachna. He looked up and noticed that he could still see the top and Flavia standing on the edge. He waved his hand to tell her he was fine. Back on top of the mountain, Flavia sighed in relief while Alan sat down with a tired face. "The heck just happened?" "Dust explosion," Flavia answered. "Though it's weird, that wasn't combustible dust. It couldn't have exploded unless what? Unless the spark was strong enough." "How hot was that arrow?" she muttered, then got an idea. She went back toward the area Alan had destroyed. She touched the ground with her finger but nothing got stuck. Not even a single speck of dirt. "I see, he somehow collected every small particle around here and compressed them into a small cluster. I guess if you gather dust, dirt, even the very small dead plants here and there, and then account in the abnormally hot arrow, it might be feasible." "Well, that arrow was probably made out of iron, right? I saw it turn back into a scarf when he was falling. Maybe he got to upgrade Sonata with the shop or something. Iron can even combust concrete." "It would make sense," Alan remarked and Flavia tilted her head. "Sonata. Alan chucked. Yep, Azure Sonata. He never told you. That's the name of his weapon. The old master made it for him last year. It can repair itself, release heat, and change form. Damn, I was so jealous at the time. I see. Looks like there are a lot of things he doesn't tell me, Flavia said with a wry smile. Even before all of this. Alan blinked at her. Well, don't get too sad. Even I don't know everything about him. I have no idea how he lived before getting adopted, and, heck, I don't even know who the old master actually was or even his name. All I know is that he was a very important person, a martial master, and an old man who somehow had access to restricted ion materials. Trust me, you don't want to know who he was, a voice said, and both Alan and Flavia shuddered. They looked back to see Rachna crouching next to them with a blank expression. Ha, ha ha ha, Alan scratched his head sheepishly. You climbed back up pretty fast, what you did was very impressive, you know. Flavia also tried to change the subject. It's fine. I don't care if you're curious about my past or the old man. I'll tell you one day if it ever comes to it, he said and stood up. He then looked at the eagle god statue and the creature that was perched in its head. His eyes met the eagle's and Rachna felt something stir inside of him. His vision blurred for a second, and when he blinked, he saw red lines all over the giant eagle that all led to a specific spot in its chest, a beating heart. With each beat, Rachna felt more and more agitated. Let's quickly go back, he said and walked toward the cliff. I'm getting hungry. His two friends looked at each other with a perplexed expression before following him. Chapter 18. Weapon Mastery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Meanwhile, the encounter between Lay's group and the black-haired girl had been interrupted because of the system message, and they both had lost sight of each other quite quickly. They had been swarmed by the eagles coming from above their heads, and the fact that the goblins had been alerted of their position wasn't helping in the slightest. Lays clicked his tongue as he stabbed an eagle coming from behind with a reverse grip. He turned around and slashed two goblins' heads before returning his blade to his sheath. We should have gone to that mountain earlier, he muttered whilst standing back with his sister. We would not have had to deal with the goblins, and the terrain would have been much more advantageous. Indeed, Dan agreed as he jumped from one tree to another with a dagger in hand. He pushed his glasses and looked at Leia, who flinched a little bit. As long as we stay in the forest, not only are goblins capable of ambushing us at any moment, but the eagles also have more blind spots to exploit, and they can retreat farther up in the sky, while if it was up there, the air would be thinner and harder to navigate for them. Fine, fine, fine. Leia shouted at him. Stop spouting smart shit, smart asses. I'm sorry I woke up late, okay? Now focus on the damn birds. The whole gang laughed at her words, and it was that moment that everyone heard and saw the detonation occur at the top of the mountain. Rachna's dust explosion was observable by every host, and they all saw the giant eagle at the top of the god statue look at it as well. The buff guy of the gang whistled as he slammed a shield on an eagle. That was flashy. I wonder who it was. Was that a bomb or something? Maybe, Dan mumbled while staring at it. He saw the blue flames that preceded the explosion, and he only knew of one thing that could produce that kind of hue. But since he couldn't really say if it was ion or just a system item, he stayed silent. In any case, let's hurry and find a shelter, Lays instructed loudly. A cave or a place with a lot of trees and no gaps would be best. If it comes to it, we can also just cut down a few trees and pile them up. BL.net, understood. When Rachna reached the foot of the mountain, his wolf ears hidden under the illusion twitched and made him look in a certain direction where a pair of glowing eyes was looking. He squinted and waited for Flavia and Alan to land next to him. What's with that look? The latter asked immediately after seeing him. Nothing. I'm just wondering if it works even like this, Rachna replied, much to the confusion of his companions. He then put his index finger and his thumb in his mouth and whistled very loudly. Right after, several howls echoed, but very shortly this time, unlike last night. This included the wolf that had been hiding in the bushes just next to the trio. Flavia heard it and saw it run off after it stopped howling. Did you just? She was baffled. I called for some help. Don't mind the details, Rachna said. Our priority right now is to get you 250 crystallized souls each. How many do you have? Alan checked his system prompt. 18, 23, Flavia followed. What about you? 53, I already reached the quota thanks to earlier. That's why I'll help you hunt, Rachna stated. Damn, you got a lot in one go. You must be level 8, right? I barely got 7 just now, Alan uttered. Same here, Flavia added and looked around. So, how do we do this? Most of the eagles already have targets. It'll be hard to find isolated ones. Do we just go steal others' hunting grounds? We don't need to, Rachna declared and whistled again. But this time, he did it sporadically as if he was trying to relay a message. He was answered with more howls. It won't take long. We can try to find some while waiting. Alan scowled. Waiting for what? He asked, and the expression his friend gave him at his inquiry surprised him. It was the usual aloof face he had gotten used to, but his eyes seemed to be almost smiling. The delivery. Somewhere in the forest, a white rabbit was chewing a leaf when it heard footsteps approaching. It froze on the spot and turned around shivering. A second after, a literal stream of gray wolves leaped over the little animal and landed loudly before continuing their run. The leader of the pack rushed toward the sounds of the humans fighting. He could hear the shouts and the cries of the birds. The leader only had one order: bring the praise back to the king. Awoo! He howled and his pack concord. They all reached the battle zone and the humans started panicking. But the leader ignored them. He was a noble level 10 gray wolf. Before they even knew what was happening, he already had caught an eagle in his mouth, still alive. At the same time, the rest of the pack disarmed the humans without killing them and proceeded to grab an eagle and bolt away. The same thing happened in several locations. The wolves assembled and formed groups to steal the prey for their king. From the sky, Gray was observing with an aggravated look. He was invisible to everyone on the ground and only the giant eagle would sometimes glance in his direction. Is that supposed to be the capability of an S+? The cyber clown muttered. That kid clearly is a werewolf. Some kind of noble blood as well. But why did all of these wolves submit to him so easily? There's that weird woman too. Why are there 2 non-human hosts in a human batch? Gray groaned louder the more he thought about it. In any case, the S+ is breaking the balance. As expected, that is what I should say, but, at this rate, it's going to completely invalidate the results. But I have no authority over the mission stipulations, he mused a bit while whirling his cane, then came to a reasonable solution. All right. We'll do it this way, he muttered and swiped his hand on his system window. A holographic keyboard then appeared and he started typing on it extremely fast. When he pressed enter, the eagles scattered across the tutorial stage abruptly stopped attacking and headed toward the school building. Lays, who was about to strike down one of them, frowned when he saw them backtrack and fly toward the school. Weird, why'd they do that? Leia muttered while shouldering a long hammer. Dan. Any witty explanation? I have no idea, Dan replied with a shrug. The wolves hadn't attacked them, so they couldn't even guess the cause of the eagles' retreat. As a matter of fact, the leaders of the wolf packs were smart enough to recognize that gang's threat and not target them. But, in any case, it's not a good sign, he added. They're gathering above the school and I'm pretty sure most of the goblins from yesterday settled there. That means if we want to continue hunting those birds, we would need to face an army of green-skinned midgets. Lei sighed. Has everyone reached their quota for the mission? No. We still have members short of a few souls, Dan informed. If they had continued to assault for a bit longer, we would all have enough. It's unlucky. What do we do now, bro? Leia asked. Lei shook his head with a sigh. Well, logically, it would be best to get close to the school and carefully pick out some praise, but it might not be that simple. Why? Leia raised an eyebrow. Did you already forget? Dan pushed his glasses. There's a certain clause in this avian trial. A clause. The prompt said, stealing from fellow hosts is permitted, remember. Wait, does that mean we can kill others for their souls? Lays rubbed his temples. Let's just do what we can. We'll get as close as possible and see if we can hunt enough for all of us to leave. The faster we do it, the better. I may not be willing to harm fellow students, but it can't be said the same for everyone. The gang nodded and followed him as he backtracked toward the school. While the hosts were panicking or even already plotting against each other, Flavia and Alan were staring dumbfounded at the many wolves sitting in front of them, happily wagging their tails like tamed dogs, with live eagles in their mouths. Kill them, Ragnar told them as he looked at the sky where he could see the last flock of eagles on its way toward the school. He squinted his eyes just a little bit and turned his scarf into a bow for a second time. He raised it and pulled on the string. 2 arrows appeared and were knocked at once. Ragnar's mastery of the bow wasn't that great compared to his most proficient skills, but his uncanny instinct as well as his wolf constitution sharpened every single of his observing capabilities. He aimed for no more than 2 seconds before releasing the string. The 2 energy arrows whistled through the air and Ragnar casually wrapped Sonata around his neck again. When he was done, 2 kill notifications appeared in front of him. Then, unexpectedly, a special prompt followed. Your archery has reached level 5. Host has accumulated a sufficient amount of level 5 proficiencies to initiate a combination. Will you fuse your weapon proficiencies? Y/N. Ragnar scowled. Alexa, what is the benefit of this fusion? You will acquire weapon mastery. Your weapon-related proficiencies will combine to create it, and its main advantage is to be able to manipulate any possible weapon, even if you have never even touched it before in your life. The level of weapon mastery will be the same as your highest proficiency. It is a rare, useful ability, Ragnar. I recommend to accept the proposal. I see, can I do the same for my hand-to-hand combat proficiencies? Unfortunately, the conditions for that combination have yet to be met. I accept this fusion. The instant he accepted, he felt something strange intruding his consciousness. It wasn't painful and it didn't seem like much had changed either. There wasn't any new information in his brain, however some of the comprehensive gaps for his already acquired proficiencies had been filled. Interesting, what is? Alan asked while approaching him, then pointed behind him with his thumb. We're done here. Both of us have 50 souls. Good. Let's go back to the school for now. Huh. Why? We have enough souls now, can't we just leave? Ragnar didn't respond and just pointed at the giant eagle resting on top of the statue. I'm not following you, those souls we're collecting, Ragnar started. We're supposed to give them to that statue. But is it really normal for us to be giving an eagle god the souls of its hunted brethren? Are you insinuating that there's more to this mission? Flavia concluded. Yes. That giant bird is probably a boss. Or at the very least, he's the guardian of the exit. There are high chances we need to defeat it to leave. Well, why not do that then? Also, if we defeat it first, we can have the bonus titles. Ragnar shook his head. Alexa, can I share system windows with other hosts? He inquired out loud, and his 2 companions could only watch puzzled until they received a prompt asking them if they agreed to receive external data. Accepted, Ragnar said and lit up a cigarette. He huffed a cloud of smoke that cut off his vision for a second. When it went away, Flavia and Alan were wearing fearful expressions. Now, if you get it, let's see if we can get some competent teammates to help us.